Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Punjab revokes general consent given to CBI. We have the Central Bureau of Investigation. Where does it draw its power from? It draws its power from the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act of 1946. What are the cases that the CBI looks into? It basically has three divisions or wings on the basis of which it looks into three types of cases. So what are the three types of cases? It includes the anti-corruption division, which looks into all types of corruption issues against the public officials. So in case there is a public official and he's committed an act of corruption, such cases will be taken up by the anti-corruption division. Then we also have the economic offences division. So what does it do? In case there is any financial problems that are undergone, like the frauds, like the money laundering, black money operations and similar instances, will be taken up by the economic offences division. In most of the cases, it is this particular division which looks into the economic offences and investigates what has been the root cause with respect to that economic offence. But because we have an enforcement director which also looks into the money laundering issues, in case there is money laundering issue that goes to the Central Bureau of Investigation, it is immediately transferred to the enforcement directorate. Apart from this, we also have the Special Crimes Division. What does it do? Let's say, for example, there is a heinous act of rape that is committed or a heinous act of murder that is committed. In such a cases, all these cases can also be given to the Special Crimes Division, which is present in the CBI. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say, for example, the Hathras rape case was also being given to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Or let's say, for example, the suicide, which is also alleged to be a murder with respect to Sushant Singh case, is also being handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation. So any heinous act of rape or murder or similar instances also comes under the Special Crimes Division. And apart from this, in case there are crimes that are related to the internal security, espionage and similar instances, can also be investigated by the Special Crimes Division. Now the question is, will the CBI be able to investigate all types of cases, whether it is occurring in the union territory or whether it is occurring in the state government? This is where we have section 2 of the Delhi Special Establishment Act of 1946. What does section 2 speak about? It clearly says, let's say if there is a corruption issue or an economic offense or a special crime, in all these cases, whatever happens in the union territory, this will be investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation, which means they need not have to seek the permission from the Lieutenant Governor or the administrative personnel, and they would be able to investigate all these cases if it is occurring in the union territory. Now you might ask me a question. The question is that Delhi has a state legislative assembly as well. Puducherry also has MLAs as well. In these cases, do they have to take the permission from Delhi government or from the Puducherry government? The answer is a plain no. Irrespective of whether they have the state assemblies or not, all the union territories and its cases can be investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation. So what is the main issue here? When it comes to the union territory, they need not have to ask the permission from anyone because the central government has already sanctioned the powers to the Central Bureau of Investigation to inquire and check into all these cases. Now comes the issue of state governments. So what is it with respect to the state governments? We know for the fact that law and order is a subject that is present under the state list. So when you look at the constitution, there is clear-cut demarcation of power. We have the union list, we also have the state list, and there is concurrent list as well. So where does the law and order come? So the law and order pictures in the state list. Since it is in the state list, the CBI will not be able to inquire into all these cases directly without the consent from the state government. That is where we have an idea called as the general consent. So what is the general consent here? It is the consent given by the state government. So it can be the state government of Maharashtra, it can be the state government of Punjab, it can be the state government of Rajasthan or any other states in India. In case the CBI has to investigate in all these cases, the state governments will have to give permission or the consent for the Central Bureau of Investigation to look into it. Where is this power given? This power is given in section 5 of the Delhi Police Establishment Act of 1946. According to it, the central government may grant, which means the central government can give or may not give as well. So it may grant the permission to the Central Bureau of Investigation to investigate certain cases other than the union territory. But there is also section 6 which also says that general consent will also have to be given by the state governments. Why do they have to give this permission? Because law and order is basically under the domain of the state governments, and it is the state governments which have all the powers to control law and order and investigation within their own demarcated boundary. In case they have to give the permission, only then the CBI can inquire into all these cases that we initially discussed. We have section 5 which clearly speaks about the central government may grant the CBI to inquire into certain cases, and we have section 6 which speaks about the general consent that has to be given by the state government. So whenever this general consent is given by the state government, let's say for about 6 months or for 1 year, in all these cases this CBI need not have to periodically ask for entering the state government and investigating certain cases. But if this general consent is removed, that is where what we have called as the specific consent. So what is this specific consent? This specific consent is given by the state government on a case-to-case basis. When it comes to the general consent, they can inquire any number of cases, but when it comes to the specific consent, it is only for that particular case. They cannot inquire any other case in that particular state. So a specific consent is with respect to a specific case, but a general consent is for investigation into all these types of cases. So what has happened in the present scenario? The Punjab government has withdrawn the general consent given to the Central Bureau of Investigation. So what is that we have to understand? That the state governments will usually have to give permission to the CBI in case an inquiry has to be done. And if this power is taken off, then what we require is a case-to-case basis that has to be given by the state government under the specific consent. Now what we have to look at is what the Supreme Court has spoken with respect to this consent. There is one of the important cases called as Lassie Lendab Dorji versus the Central Bureau of Investigation and others in the year 1994. What does the Supreme Court say? Let's say for example, there is a case which is already taken up by the Central Bureau of Investigation. It is already inquiring and investigating with respect to a state. If the state government now withdraws the consent, it would not be in a position to take away the power of the CBI for the case already being investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation. So it means it cannot have a retrospective effect. So if there is a case which is already being investigated, the Central Bureau of Investigation continues with the investigation and the state government cannot take away this particular power. So what will happen in this particular case? The consent given will have a prospective effect, which means the Central Bureau of Investigation will not be able to take up any cases from the date from which this particular consent has been withdrawn by the state government. Now let's take another scenario. Let's say there is a heinous act of rape or murder, or let's say there is a grave economic offense as well. In such a scenario, if this particular case heads to a high court or it heads to a Supreme Court as well, in that particular case, if a constitutional court asks the CBI to investigate, to inquire about this particular case, then the state government's permission is not required in this particular case. So if the Constitutional Court gives the permission to the Central Bureau of Investigation, and even if the state government has withdrawn the general consent, the CBI will still be able to inquire into that particular case. So what is the inference that we can draw? The inference that we can draw is the withdrawal of consent by a state government can be effective only for a prospective effect and not for a retrospective effect. And when there is a constitutional court which has given the permission, the entry of the CBI cannot be denied by that respective state governments, and in the near future, in case they have to head to that particular state when the general consent is withdrawn, they have to seek the permission of that particular state government, is what this article all about. So what is the present context here? It says that Punjab government has currently revoked the general general consent which was awarded to the Central Bureau of Investigation is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says NGT links cracker sales to air quality, and we also have another article called as no fireworks. We have taken up both these articles and we will have a discussion with respect to this article. First up, what we have to understand is that NGT has issued a new direction. According to it, in case there are cities and towns which have the ambient air quality which falls in the poor category and anything beyond it which can be very poor or severe, in such a city or a town, what we will have is a restriction with respect to bursting of the crackers from when to when? From November 10th up until 30th. So in case there is a city or a town and the ambient air quality is poor, where the air quality index is around 201 to 300 or 301 to 400, or there is 401 to 500, in all these cases this could result in possible devastation on the health. That is why there would be a regulation that is directed by the National Green Tribunal, which currently says that there'll be a total ban on the sale or use of all kinds of firecrackers between November 10th up until November 30th. And this notification is also directed and extended to the National Capital Delhi and the National Capital Region as well. So kindly remember, this initiative has been taken basically because there is increasing cases of pollution in the national capital, and at the same time there is also a cause of increasing cases of COVID-19. So there is an assumption that more the pollution, more will be the suffocation, and this could be a problem for all those people suffering from COVID-19. And apart from this, there is also another directive that is also issued by the National Green Tribunal. Let's say if the air quality index is moderate or anything above it, that is, it can be satisfactory or it can be good. In all these cities and towns, they would be able to burst the green crackers only for a prescribed time amount, which means they would not be able to burn the crackers for a complete day, but there'll be a time period that which will be given by the NGT. Only during that period they would be able to burst the green crackers, says this particular directive. So what is it? Previously, we have the Supreme Court of India, which had also issued certain directives for bursting of green crackers, and this was clearly for about 2 hours or more in a tentative timeline. Further, this can also be extended to Christmas as well as New Year as well. Why did the National Green Tribunal come up with this particular directive? That is because it basically senses in case there is an excessive pollution and if firecrackers is exasperating this particular issue, what can happen during this particular period is that this can actually result in heavy health issues as well as the productivity cost as well. How productivity cost? Let's say for example, if there is excessive pollution, this can also result in suffocation and people may not be able to attend the offices as well. This can obviously mean there is drop in the productivity levels. Why? Because they are not able to breathe easily. That is why they have given importance to the health and they have taken up this decision that firecrackers need not have to be bursted during this particular period. And at the same time, the tribunal has also requested the Central Pollution Control Board and at the same time the State Pollution Control Board to monitor the air quality index during this particular period and upload all the relevant data on their respective websites. In case it happens to reduce, they can go back and burst the green crackers, and if it is in the poor, very poor or severe category, there will be restrictions with respect to bursting of the crackers. But when we look at all these criteria, there is one sector that we may have to look at, and that is the firecracker industry. When you look at the firecracker industry, there are concerns with respect to this industry. Why? Because this industry is worth around 2,300 crore worth of output. So there are large number of people who are employed in this firework industry. So these are the people who will be impacted. Why? If there is no productivity, it means they might also lose out on their jobs as well, and ultimately it is these people who will be the major sufferers. And one state which will be impacted the most is the state of Tamil Nadu, and especially the place called as Sivakasi, where maximum manufacturing or production of the firecrackers happens in this particular state. And when it comes to addressing this particular issue, we may also have to look at other possible measures as well. One is compensating the producers as well as the people who are losing their jobs, and in the near future we also need to look at alternatives as well, and reducing the reliance on the firecrackers has to be taken up. So an alternative economic activity for the producer as well as for the people working in this firecracker industry will also have to be taken up, says this particular article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to both these articles. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the cost of clearing the air. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had recently announced a 4,400 crore package for 2020 and 21 to tackle air pollution in 102 of India's most polluted cities. What is the objective of this particular fund? The objective is to reduce particulate matter by 20 to 30% from 2017 levels by 2024 under the National Clean Air Program. So this fund that was sanctioned by the finance minister will be used to reduce the pollution in about 102 cities in India. Now the question and the matter of this particular article is various concerns associated with this particular funding. So what is the major issue? It isn't clear how this budgetary outlays will be spent for the subsequent years. It has been given by the central ministry, but how will this be used for the next couple of years up until 2024 is still not categorized, says this particular article. So the budgetary outlays with respect to this funding is still not clear for the subsequent number of years. It is still not clear how this amount is helping when it comes to improving the air quality index. What was the basis on which this 4,400 crores package was announced? Was there a survey? Was there a study? So is this a random amount, or if there is a survey, what does the survey speak about? If there is a study, what does the study speak about is what needs to be inquired, says this particular article. So what is the basis on which this particular amount was sanctioned by the central government is what needs to be pondered. Then the scale of problem is still not unknown. What do we mean by it? Let's say, for example, there are a couple of studies that are conducted in India and in the Delhi as well. So what are these studies? Are these studies 100% sure? Will there be errors? And if there are errors, how are we going to rectify it? And when we are giving this particular study, who are the students or who are the research scholars who are conducting this particular study? So we do not know what exactly is the scale of problem. We do not know what would be the effects of this particular study and what would be the side effects in terms of environment, in terms of health and other issues costing the state as well. So the scale of the problem with respect to a particular study, with respect to a particular report and the research is still not sure. Even if you are sure, what is the error margin is what needs to be pondered. This is the negative impact because of couple of studies, and all this will also have to be considered by the government when it is making a sanction or a package introduced for the environmental pollution control. Apart from this, when you look at this particular funding as sanctioned by the central government, most of the states, when they get this funding from the central government, they use it for the act of measurement. So what is this act of measurement? We have to measure the pollution. So how do we measure the pollution? We require the technology. We also require some of the measuring machines as well. Most of the states in India currently have what is called as the manual machines. What we require is the automatic machines. So what the state governments do is they upgrade from the manual to the automatic machines to remember and also to generate data when it comes to the pollution. Why should they remember? That is because we are able to control this particular pollution from the 2017 levels for the year 2024. So what this technology will have to do is to collect the statistics for a particular year, and we also have to compare it with the previous years and the next couple of years as well. So what we require is an upgradation from the manual to the automatic data. So the money that is being given by the central government to the state governments will be most of the times spent for this upgradation. How will they spend on other controlling measures is what this article criticizing about. Further, Whenever we are using a pollution control technology, what it also requires is the manpower. Why manpower? That is because I should be able to know and use that particular technology. If there are no people to understand that particular technology, if there are no people to make use of this particular technology, what is the use of it? So this will also mean that we require money to train the manpower as well, so that we are able to allocate certain amount of money for making sure that there is knowledge transfer that is given with respect to understanding the pollution levels and collecting the data statistics. We also require the support system as well. So most of the money given is again not accommodated for these sectors, says this particular article. Further, the government in the past has also allocated 600 crores which was spent by the Ministry of Agriculture over 2 years to provide subsidized equipment to the farmers. This is in specific reference to, let's say for example, Haryana, or in specific reference to Punjab. This is where there is maximum areas of stubble burning farmers as well. So whenever there is stubble burning that takes up, it immediately spreads to the national capital region, that is Delhi, and in and around. So what has the Ministry of Agriculture done? In order to make sure that stubble burning does not happen, subsidies were also given to farmers as well. But in spite of these subsidies given so that the farmers take up an alternative route, farmers still continue to burn the stubble as well. In fact, when you look at this particular year, there is an increase compared to the last year as well. So what is the need of the hour? The need of the hour is pollution control is not only about money, it is also about making sure all these issues are addressed. And at the same time, it is not only about money, it is about critical infrastructure, it is about proper enforcement. So we have couple of laws in picture, but how are these laws going to be implemented? Who is going to enforce it? Who is going to monitor it? And how are we going to collect the statistics? And how are we going to compare it? All this is part of the enforcement. So it is not only about money sanctioning, but it is about building the infrastructure, making it with proper enforcement. Adequate staffing is required, and in case there are sources that are not checked, in case there are sources that needs to be checked, such should also be taken into picture going forward for the National Clean Air Program to be successful, is what we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about internal turmoil in the country of Ethiopia. Let's try and understand everything about this particular issue. We have the Tigray, which happens to be one of the northernmost region of Ethiopia. We have the Tigrayan people who also make up for an estimated 6% of the country's population. So out of nearly 110 million population, 6% of this country's population belongs to the Tigray ethnic group. Despite its small number, they have disproportionate power and influence when it comes to the government affairs. So out of 100%, they have 6% in the population, but when it comes to the control in the government, they have disproportionate power and they wield a lot of influence when it comes to the conduction of the governmental activity. Previously, after fighting the military dictatorship that was ruled in the year 1970 to 1980, we have one of the important fronts called as the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which was able to capture the power. So during 1970s and up until 1980s, there was the rule of dictatorship, and this was taken off, and what we have was the establishment of Ethiopian People's Revolution Democratic Party. So this was headed by a person called as Meles Zenawi, who happens to be a Tigray who led Ethiopia from the year 1991 up until his death in the year 2012. When you look at this particular chart, you have Ethiopia, which is generally divided into number of provinces, or what you can also call as states. But these states once again are configured on the basis of ethnicity as well. Let's say for example, when you look at the northernmost part of the Tigray region, you have the Tigrayan people. They are one of the ethnic communities. When you're speaking about Oromia, we have one of the communities called as the Oromos who are present in that particular lane. So what we have is the geographical condition, which means the state are configured on the basis of ethnic lines as well. So what do we see right now? When you look at Ethiopia or any country for that matter, it is usually usually the largest community which usually wields the power, and it will be the controlling influence as well. But when it comes to Ethiopia, we have one of the minority groups, or which has a comparative lesser population, which was wielding a large or disproportionate power when it comes to the government resources. Apart from this, there was also a lot of corruption issues as well. There were people who were going against the government as well. There were anti-government protests as well. And as a result, from the year 2012 up until 2018, there was large-scale protests against the government. Then what we have is Prime Minister being elected, called as Mr. Abiy, who becomes the Prime Minister in the year 2018. So this person, Mr. Abiy, happens to be from one of the ethnic groups called as Oromos, and this Oromos happens to be the largest ethnic group, that which was earlier complaining of marginalization. So the minute Mr. Abiy comes into power, he wants to remove this uneven distribution of power. So what does he do? All those people from the Tigray community were comparatively reduced, and he starts bringing in his own set of people, his own set of ethnic group into the government as well. So what exactly happens? There is a conflict between one ethnic group and another indirectly. But this is not still fledged out into a full-fledged war or the ethnic tensions. But what is happening is that there is Tigray community which is comparatively reduced from the government power circles, and what we have is the Oromos stepping into the power vacuum. So this ultimately means that in the present scenario, all the autonomy that was also being given to the states in Ethiopia was also stripped away, and there was centralization of power as well. So what exactly happens? We have couple of states in Ethiopia, and these states have completely autonomy as well, and this autonomy was comparatively reduced. Why? Because Mr. Abiy wanted to control and have a centralizing power when it comes to Ethiopia. So what happens right now? This is where Tigray, which happens to be in the northernmost region, which also has the powers of Tigray People's Liberation Front, and which also believes in autonomy, was not taking it lightly. Why? Because there was centralization. So there was a conflict between autonomy as well as centralization. That is where they go about attacking the federal military base in Tigray. So the minute they attack the federal military base in Tigray, that is when Mr. Abiy has declared a war on this particular region. So kindly remember, this was a friction between ideology, this was a friction between ethnic groups, this was a friction between autonomy of the states and centralization. So when this was opposed by the Tigray region, which currently wanted autonomy, and since they were removed from the power circles, they go and attack the federal military base in Tigray, and that is when Mr. Abiy declares a war in this particular region. Now the question is, how will this impact the neighboring countries, is what we have to look at. Why? Because whenever there is an ethnic issue or there is an internal turmoil, people start moving from that particular country into the neighboring countries. Since there is turmoil, there is disturbance, there is peace and tranquility that is disturbed, what will happen? People start moving from one country to another. So in this particular case, because it is Tigray region which is impacted, most of the people may go to Eritrea in this particular case. So Eritrea will be the hardest hit country due to the proximity with Tigray. If the violence and conflict continues to haunt, then this can also spill over to other countries like Somalia, or it can also disturb Djibouti as well. In case it is disturbing Djibouti, what we will have is that countries like United States of America and China can also involve as well. Why they can involve? That is because they have established their military bases in Djibouti, and if there are spillover to Djibouti and if it is causing harm to their bases, that is when these countries can also get involved in this particular turmoil. So basically, when we are looking into this particular issue, we are speaking about the turmoil in Ethiopia and what disturbance it can cause to the neighboring countries. So what is the way forward? We have understood that this particular country has various states and they also have autonomy and different ethnic tensions. And now during the period of pandemic, it is important that we focus on important issues at hand rather than taking up all the old ethnic tensions right now. So the need of the hour is to fight the external enemy, and that happens to be the COVID-19. So going forward, we have to reach out to the regional political leadership, especially that of the Tigris People Liberation Front, and run the country peacefully, says this particular article. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about lessons that we would be able to draw from Vietnam as well as Bangladesh. Why? When you look at the statistics, you have Bangladesh, which has become the second largest apparel exporter after China. And when we look at Vietnam, they have grown by about 240% in the past 8 years when it comes to their exports to other countries. So what can India learn when it comes to export-led growth for India, and lessons that we can draw is what this article all about. First up, let's focus on Vietnam. Vietnam basically has three important policies. One is the open trade policy, the second is the incentive structure, and the third is the cheap labor, which is helping Vietnam to actually score more over other countries. So what is this open trade policy? Basically, you have Vietnam, which has entered into free trade agreements with couple of countries. This has directly entered into a free trade agreement with the Asian countries. It has entered into free trade agreement with United States of America. It has entered into free trade agreement with European Union, Japan, South Korea and China. So what happens with this free trade agreement is all the exports that it makes from Vietnam to another country will have no tariffs, or taxes will not be imposed on them. And at the same time, in case there are imports from all these countries to Vietnam, again they will be taxed nothing as well. So what happens here? Because they have the free trade agreements, they are able to export more to the other countries, and at the same time they are also accepting as well. The second important factor is with respect to incentives. So what is this incentives? Basically, Vietnam aggressively liberalized its economy. How? By lowering its tariffs. So what does it do? It cuts down all the taxes, and it also attracts the foreign investment. It has also made sure that in case there are domestic laws which are objecting to the investments coming to Vietnam, it also changes these domestic laws as well. And at the same time, its tax levels are amongst the lowest in the world, and several of the top electronic companies with manufacturing and export bases have also testified the same as well. So what is happening here? The tariffs is comparatively low, and in case they require any domestic law changes that needs to be accommodated, such laws are also changed as well. Apart from this, in case there is a lacuna when it comes to the infrastructure, the infrastructural support is also provided by Vietnam as well. And apart from this, the foreign firms can also compete with the local businesses as well. So there is no foreign company, there is no domestic company as such, there is no bifurcation as such. In fact, all companies are treated equally. You have the European Union firms which can also open shops, enter the retail trade and bid for both government as well as private sector tenders. They also take part in electricity, real estate, hospital and defense. This is subjective. Why? Because this can be accommodative to Vietnam, but the same cannot be accommodative to India. So what are the most important factors? One is the low tariffs, the second is the infrastructural development, and the third is with respect to changes in the domestic laws so that they can actually push for the foreign investments into that particular country. The third and the most important of all is the cheap labor. Vietnam has involved in attracting the foreign direct investments. That is primarily because of the cheap labor and also because of the environment friendly atmosphere and reduction in taxes when it comes to the foreign enterprises. It is these three policies that Vietnam is able to accommodate, so that this has made Vietnam as one of the countries which is exporting maximum to other countries. And at the same time, when you look at Bangladesh as well, they have a similar approach as well. They have a cheap labor. They've also entered into free trade agreements with couple of countries so that they would also be able to export without any tariffs or taxes being imposed on them. So what is the impact of this particular move? The impact would be Vietnam and Bangladesh have gained enormously from this particular trade. So they have generated wealth, they have provided the employment opportunities, and as a result, since people are getting rich, they are able to remove people from the poverty as well. So the wealth generation and providing of employment has moved people away from the poverty brackets. So what is that India can emulate or understand or learn from these two countries? Basically, when you're looking at the large companies, all the support that is required for the large companies, whether it is apparel, whether it is any other company, support system will have to be provided by India. When it comes to the larger companies, they would have all the money that is required. They would be able to build a brand as well, and they would not compromise on the brand quality as well. So what India has to do, that it has to categorize the large companies, it has to categorize the small companies, and provide all types of efforts and subsidies to the larger companies. And at the same time, India should also set up the sectorial industrial zones where there has to be pre-approved factory spaces. The license raj, the permit raj, and the red tape that is already reduced will have to be further reduced. There has to be a single window transfer, and in case there are any issues for that particular company, they will also have to be addressed according to this particular issue. So the minute this industrial body wants to start off with the business, all the permissions will have to be provided, and they will also have to be provided with land and required infrastructure, that which has to be provided, says the author of this article. So going forward, India will have to make a rigorous analysis, compete with the Asian peers, whether it is in terms of free trade agreements or creation of amicable and stable businesses, financial incentives, or creating last mile connectivity, or most importantly, low cost quality labor will all have to be provided, says this particular article. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. eSanjeevani, recently seen in news, is it a telemedicine platform, technology that digitizes vaccine stocks, cloud computing platform, or a central database to track the development of COVID vaccine? The answer to this is, it is a telemedicine platform. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this ad. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to red sanders, which of the following statements is or incorrect? It is one of the most important trees in the tropical rainforest areas of South India. Red sanders is now free of export restrictions. Its oil is used in the production of Mysore sandal soap, which has been accorded with the geographical indication tag. Which of the statements are incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is 1 and 3. Why are the first and the third statement wrong? That is because it is not the tropical rainforest, but instead it is the dry deciduous forest. And also remember, when it comes to red sanders, they are totally different from the sandalwood, which gives the aroma. So we have the Petrocarpus santinalis, which is also called as red sanders, the red saunders, and the red sandalwood. This tree is usually seen in the southern Eastern Ghats mountain range of South India. This tree is valued for the rich red color of its wood. The wood is not aromatic. The tree is not to be confused with the aromatic Santalum sandalwood trees that grow natively in South India. So it is this whose oil is used for the Mysore sandal, and that is being given the GI tag, but it is not the red sanders. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements with respect to Apta Mitra. It is an initiative to clean and protect the Ganga river. The focus of the government is to involve people living on the banks of the river to attain sustainable results. Which of the above statements is or correct? The answer to this is none. Why? Because this particular mission is not about rejuvenating the Ganga river. Instead, it is a centrally sponsored scheme where volunteers are trained in all those flood prone districts. So basically, this is one of the programs where people are identified, volunteers are trained to mitigate the disasters after they have been identified as a flood region. So volunteers will be able to act as the first responders, assist the community in effective disaster response, and also assist the district administration in providing all types of relief during that particular period as first responders. So kindly remember, Apta Mitra is one of the community volunteers response program. Now let's look into the next practice question. The Great Malay Connectivity Project connects Malay to which of the following neighboring islands? Vilingili, Funadu, Tilafushi, Gulhi for you, and Alimata. The answer to this is 1, 3, and 4. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. And yesterday we have discussed about this particular issue of Maldives as well. In the present scenario, they have signed an agreement for the development of Great Malay Connectivity Project. Now let's look into the next practice question. In the Mekong Ganga Cooperation, an initiative of 6 countries, which of the following is not a participant or a participant? Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, Myanmar, and Thailand. Select the correct answer using the code given below. The answer to this is 1 and 3 only. So which are the countries which are part of the Mekong Ganga Cooperation? It includes India, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And Bangladesh and China are not part of the Mekong Ganga Cooperation. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Budgetary allocations alone does not reflect the true cost of reducing air pollution. Examine the statement and suggest measures to reduce pollution and protect health. What lessons can India learn from Vietnam and Bangladesh to manage export-led growth? So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with constructive criticism as well. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.